First of all, a very good afternoon to all the participants of today's webinar. We have, members from Bombay Industries Association as well as our Andhra Web, customers here today. So we thought we have to give something interesting. I do understand it's raining webinars all over, but we thought how we could create value to the participants today and also create a different subject where ultimately it should lead to understanding the GST perspectives in a better manner so that it can contribute to business savings and profit maximization. So whenever it comes to business, ultimately it nails down to the that part where, so what is the gain, what is the net financial savings I have, or what is the profit maximization, how I can work towards that. So I'm sure every business would be focusing on that part, especially with these unforeseen scenarios which have come up. I'm sure every saving does matter to the business, and every opportunity to maximize profits is very, very important. So keeping this in perspective, we decided upon today's topic, which is titled as GST, the top myths and misnomers. And also, we do not stop there. We will also see how curatives can be opted for such kinds of myths and misnomers. So today we have chosen top 10 misnomers or myths in GST, and that has been segregated into 10 different topics in GST. So each of this, the approach to the session would be, I would be first discussing what is the myth or the general perception or the general misunderstanding people have, what actually it is. So what is the realistic fact about it? And also one couple of illustrations I'll be taking through so that people can connect very easily whenever we discuss in the form of illustrations and case laws. Ultimately, after we discuss all of these 10 things, we will discuss about the curatives as a last part of it. Of course, we have a Q&A session, which we will be taking up at the end of this discussion. So the 10 different topics and one myth under each topic, what we have chosen is the consideration, classification, supplies, input tax credits, valuation, documentation, turnover determination, transaction treatments, transaction capture, and reporting. These might sound a little like jargons. Don't worry, I've taken a lot of illustrations to keep it simple and make it understandable to you. So this is how we would be going around. So first, let us discuss the myths and misnomers and what real facts are. So the first thing, consideration should be in monetary form only. Any commercial transaction will have a consideration, and consideration is, we always call it as reciprocal, meaning there is a two-way consideration. So let's say a business is selling the goods. So there is a two-way consideration. The customer gets the goods, the business gets the money. So there is a general tendency to think that only if I receive something in the money form, then it leads to a consideration in a commercial transaction. However, the reality is not so. Consideration can be anything and in any form. In fact, there is a definition in the GST law as well. Section 2 subsection 31 talks about what all consideration includes and how it could be. I haven't reproduced the definition per se, but I have taken the gist points of it because I understand the members are from trade and industry. So to make it understandable to them and reach out to them in a better manner, I've tried to simplify what it envisages or what it defines the term consideration as. Firstly, consideration can be in monetary form or it can be non-monetary form. Okay. So it can be either in a monetary form or non-monetary form. When I say non-monetary form, it can be in kind, it can be in the form of an action. Let's say I am providing a consultation service to my client. So I am not giving him any goods. He is paying me money for a service which I am providing, which is in the kind of an action, a verbal way, or I'm writing an opinion about it and giving to him. So consideration for him, by consulting me, he is receiving the consultation service, which is an action. So always it need not be in the money form, and it can be a combination of both. The classic example can be of the real estate sector, where whenever this land development is undertaken, so part money, generally there is either a refundable deposit or a non-refundable deposit in the monetary form, which is given to the landowner. At the same time, the developed plots or the buildings, completed buildings or apartments are given to the landlord also in exchange for the rights in the land received. So here there is a partly in monetary form and partly in non-monetary form. It can be even in any other kind form. As I said, again, it can be in action form. What is action? Action can be a positive action. Action can be an inaction. Action can be a negative action. Let me simplify these things for you. I do not want to sound it like a tongue twister for you. So if we have little kids at home, I'm sure they do all this hangama and all that stuff. Just to make them keep quiet, we give them some chocolate. So they are receiving this chocolate as consideration for keeping quiet. So they get something for doing nothing. So likewise, consideration, even keeping quiet can be a consideration. In fact, we call it as act of tolerance. So let's say, there is, I sent the goods through a transport, and in between, due to mishandling by the transporter, some of the goods got damaged. So, and what I do is, I will tolerate that, and instead of paying him, let's say 1 lakh rupees, I am paying him only 80,000, reducing that value. What I'm doing here is I'm tolerating his wrongdoing or mismanagement, whatever he did. So there is an act of tolerance or inaction from my end. I'm keeping quiet irrespective of whatever he did. And a positive action, as I said, providing this consultation service could be a positive action. Negative action, if we see any of these contracts like non-compete terms, like there's a partnership firm, and whenever a partner resigns or retires from the partnership firm, there will be generally a clause that for another 3 years he should not do the business in the same line. So it is like a non-compete term, and also it is like, and for that he will get certain amount of money or goodwill from the firm. So that being the case, there is a negative action or not doing of something. So that is also a consideration. And another very important aspect about consideration is it can be past, present, or future. So it could be one portion of consideration might have come earlier itself to me, or it might be during this course of transaction, or even in case of a future thing. So it can be any of these things. Let me take a small example. We have a lot of exchange melas happening and all of that stuff. If we take Big Bazaar, they say that, you can give your old TV and all of that stuff and buy a new one. And many a times business offers something like, this, buy one, get one free kind of a thing, or freebies and free of cost supplies are given. And even this promotional materials in the form of diaries, calendars are given. Just think from the business perspective. Will ever any business will do something for free under business? Business is for commercial purpose. I'm sure all of you would agree that nothing would come for the purpose of free under business. Why these exchange melas are done? So that promotion of sales will get promoted, so that otherwise people would not buy it. But because of this mela, we are attracting more people. So there is this, more business which is getting generated. So there is a two-way transaction in wherever there is an exchange or barter, because there is one inward supply and one outward supply. I'm giving something and I'm taking something. So again, when it comes to freebies and free of cost supplies, many of the times, we think that because we are not receiving any money for that, so we need not pay tax on that. On the other hand, why would any business give something for free? Do you think it is for a charitable purpose? Definitely not. The business is intended to build loyalty of its customers. When something is given free to their customers, they feel good about it. They feel that they got more value, and hence they might become the brand loyal customers for you. So that being the case, Either it is for the past business, whatever they have given you, you are giving them the freebies, or in anticipation of future business, you are giving them the freebies. So to bring it to the fact here, whenever there is a freebies or free of cost supplies given, there is this confusion whether we need to reverse the input tax credits with respect to the purchases whatever we made towards this freebies. To my mind, what it appears is, although there is no monetary value associated with to such freebies and free of cost supplies, there is some other kind of consideration which is attached therewith in the form of loyalty of the customers. So that being the case, definitely it calls for treating it as an outward supply, treating it as a sale transaction and charging the tax on it. Of course, it will not stop you from claiming the credit. But remember, suppose if you're alternatively taking it to reverse the input tax credits with respect to freebies and free of cost supplies, one, definitely tomorrow there is a possibility that during assessments, department can question this as this is a supply and you need to discharge tax on this, because the term supply is very wide. It includes any form of transfer also. So whenever you are giving it, and as I said, consideration is completely fulfilled here, there is a loyalty which is getting built. That itself is a sufficient consideration. So for a business, from the business perspective, it is very much ideal whenever you are doing this, any of this, free schemes and all of that stuff, show it as an outward supply, claim the corresponding ITC, because once you miss the deadline of the September of the following year, which is the last date for claiming the previous year credits, your credits are gone. So tomorrow, if assessments happen after 2 or 3 years, you will not be in a position to claim the credit that is anyways gone. At the same time, you will be required to discharge tax on your outward supply. So this is one of the things which the business can think over. Same applies even with respect to promotional material like diaries and calendars distributed to customers, staff, and whatsoever reason. It is again for the purpose of creating a brand value and adding your customers to make them give a feel good factor and all of that stuff, and reminding them that you are there, your presence and all of that stuff. Many a times it is expensed off even sometimes owing to different thought processes, input tax credit is also reversed in these matters. But let us remember that in business, nothing is free and everything is for the purpose of business. Hence, there would be a consideration incumbent within this. Now, second important part, myth we would be discussing is with respect to classification. Most of the times, what generally businesses follow is, let's say I'm purchasing one material from a supplier. He has put 12% rate on it. I will not even evaluate whether that classification is right or wrong. Because my supplier has put 12%, I will create an SKU in my accounts at the same rate, configuring the same rate, same HSN and everything, and charge the same rate of tax. What if he has erred? Adoption of classification followed by the supplier is not fine in actuality. Classification is the responsibility of every supplier. If my OEM, the original manufacturer, has done a mistake or distributor has done a mistake, that doesn't absolve me from my responsibility. If ultimately, if the product is held out to be, let's say 18%, I cannot say that I followed whatever my supplier followed. The error carry forward is not permitted. So business has to be very vigilant. Whatever they are selling, be it goods or services, they have to independently evaluate whether the HSN classification, whether the rate of tax, everything is proper. Because let us remind ourselves that GST is an indirect tax, and here we are only acting as an agent to collect tax and pay to the government. If it is 12%, I'll collect 12%. If it is 18%, I'll collect 18%. I only collect and pay. Now imagine the situation where you erred, that you chose a 12% rate when it ought to have been 18%. Do you think that you can take a stand tomorrow that I did not collect it, hence I will not pay it? Not possible. It is the responsibility of every supplier to determine what is the correct rate of tax, collect so much and pay it. Collection of tax is a commercial negotiation, and whether or not you collect, you have to pay it. So this is the critical aspect of the classification. So a misclassification, imagine you losing 6% on the turnover. Let's say 12% is determined, but in fact it is 18%. Today the margins are very much shrinking. No business makes so much of margin on turnover. So that being the case, one has to be extremely careful and cautious whether the rates of tax, whatever we have determined for our goods and services, whether it is right or wrong. Because misclassification can not only lead to reduction in profits, but it can even erode my capital. You know, on so much of turnover, I'll have to pay tax plus delay, interest, and if department identifies it, there could be a penal consequences as well. So it is better to be safe than sorry, and that is why classification is an important exercise. I want to give a small example which we experienced in the initial days, in a couple of cases where we saw this. Tamarind was classified under 12% HSN. I mean, the classification and the rate was 12%. And later on, it was reduced to 5%. But many of the suppliers, they thought tamarind is exempt and they supplied without collecting any tax. Now, a client of mine, he just came in and said, I purchased tamarind from 3 people. 2 of them are not charging any tax, but 1 person is charging 12% tax. So what should I do? Same product, different suppliers treating it as different. So can I make 2 SKUs and say that whatever I purchase from that person who is charging 12%, that I will charge? No. And there will be price differentiation as well. Irrespective of whether my supplier collects GST or not, or whatever rates he collects, I will pay to him whatever he raises an invoice. I can't make him comply. But whenever I am making an outward supply, whenever I am selling it to my customers, for all the tamarind I bought, I was supposed to discharge at 12% rate, later on which got reduced to 5%. So what point I'm trying to bring about is classification would be an independent exercise which needs to be carried out by every supplier. Now, the next myth. We are all aware that under the GST concept, whenever goods move from one branch to another branch, especially if it is outside the state, and in case of a registered, GST, I mean, if inside the state itself, we have multiple registrations having the same PAN. So whenever there is this stock transfer, then we have to deem it to be a supply. At the Pan India level, I am the same person, right? It is like taking out money from my left pocket and putting it to my right pocket. At the Pan India level, there is no difference, but government wants to have control regarding the movement of goods. For the very same reason, it said that even though there is no consideration, whenever there is a transaction between a distinct person, who is a distinct person? Same PAN, multiple GST numbers. They are treated, they are called as distinct persons under GST. So that being the case, whenever there is inter-se supply of goods, we are all aware. We raise a tax invoice just as a regular thing, and as far as the turnover for the income tax purpose or our real turnover is concerned, we will exclude that. But for the GST purpose, definitely that adds to the turnover. This we follow for goods. What about services? Services always have a difficulty of identification, because if we look at the definition of services, services include anything other than goods. No, there are 2 exceptions, money and securities. We'll not get into that, but it says anything other than goods. Anything can mean everything. Anything includes everything. So that being the case, services is defined in a very, very wide manner, and it is very difficult to identify or very clearly segregate and identify that there is a supply of service. So that calls for all the more vigilance whenever services are involved, especially with respect to distinct persons, because in other cases, probably the consideration test is not there. So if I do not receive money, then I clearly, money or in some form of consideration, I can clearly associate and connect to it. But in case of distinct persons, we have the schedule 1, which we called as deemed supply, which states that activities should be treated as supply even if it is made without consideration. So meaning, even though there is no consideration, it will be treated as supply for the purpose of GST, and tax needs to be discharged on the same. In fact, the question comes, okay, if there is no consideration, then on what amount will I discharge the taxes? So we have Rule 28, which talks about whenever in case of distinct persons, how we must value the transaction. There is generally this open market value or cost plus method. So there are some methods put across in the Rule 28. So accordingly, we need to comply to those transactions. Let me take an illustration. There is a CEO or CFO at the entity level or the head office level. Generally, it's a pan-India, CEO or CFO we would be having, and even the superior level managerial employees for that matter. We might have common employees for the entire organization and specific employees to each branches. Now, these common employees do provide services to other branches as well. They might be analyzing some of the reports of the other branches. They might be taking a decision with respect to some business aspects pertaining to those branches. So all of these things are possible. So we have this Columbia Asia Advanced Ruling also, which upholds the fact that whenever there is these kinds of inter-branch supplies of services, then a cross charge is required. That is the most familiar and common terminology which is used whenever the inter-branch transactions or services are provided. So we need to look into these aspects of services because it is quite hard to identify, and it is mostly in the disguised form where we just think it is an employee cost. Where is an outward supply? Where is the money being received and all that? But it is disguised in this form. So we have to be careful about identifying what all the services a HO or other branches are providing to other distinct persons. So that being the case, we have to value it and discharge the taxes ideally on month basis. Let's take another example of an IT sector. Let's say a software company. It has 10 employees in branch 1, 20 employees in branch 2, and there is HO. And at HO, let's say there are 30 employees, okay? And a contract is backed by HO for development of software. So it finds that in branch 2, there are so many man hours idle available. So it wants to utilize these man hours for this project, which HO will be billing. So the contract will be with HO. So the invoice, everything will get raised under HO's GST. But there is this supply of man hours. So many man hours are being supplied by one branch to another branch. So this cross supply would be very much required. At least in these cases, it might be quite evident, but there could be so many other possibilities where inter-branch services could have could have been hidden. So careful evaluation of the transactions would be required. So let us go to the myth number 4. Most of the times what we understand is, whenever it is claiming of an input tax credit, having an invoice is very much critical. I'm sure every business knows this, and either in the electronic form or physical form, they preserve the vouchers and the invoices so that they have a credit claim evidence and proper documentation. However, it's very important to note that not only the possession of invoice, possession of a proper invoice containing some specific fields is very, very critical, which is generally missed out during our audit observations. We generally look into all of these things. Vouching verification is one of the activity undertaken during audit. Now, there is this Rule 36, which talks about the essential conditions which I should fulfill before I can claim the input tax credits. Now, if you are raising a tax invoice, what all fields it should have? In fact, Rule 46 prescribes 17 fields which should be present in a tax invoice. Of course, some of them are conditional, subject to fulfillment of certain conditions. Those fields should come in. What I'm trying to point out is, initially they said that all these 17 fields should be present. However, later they brought an amendment to Rule 36 saying that if not all of these 17 fields, there are 6 critical fields which should be present in every invoice on which you are claiming input tax credits. So if these 6 are not present, again, your credit claim could go into litigation. Again, this is further substantiated by Circular 90, which says that whenever a tax invoice is raised and if you're supplying it for an interstate transaction, be it goods or services, then place of supply is a mandatory requirement which should be there. Otherwise, it can lead to a penal consequences under Section 122 or 125, which can go up to 50,000 of penalty. Now, what are the 6 essential or the quintessential fields? Probably you can, train your team which does this input tax credit accounting and the finance or the accounts team which takes care of this. They must be aware that these 6 fields are mandatory. I'm sure most of them would check for the GST number, whether our GST number and supplier GST number is there. However, one commonly observed point is that place of supply in case of interstate supply, this is not checked. So going by Rule 36(2) proviso, as we discussed, if there is no place of supply in case of interstate supply, then I might end up the credit might become ineligible, or it might go for a litigative route because it's a procedural law. So anyways, from the being on the safer side and avoiding litigation costs and all that, it would always be suggested to go for a compliance oriented approach rather than a litigation approach. So that being the case, compliance would be the key. We have seen that GST has been greatly a compliance oriented law ever since it's been implemented. Now, another topic which we have chosen is valuation. Price received from the customer only needs to be reckoned for arriving the taxable value. In fact, as far as consideration is concerned, it can come from anybody. If we say that a student is studying, we enroll a student to the college or school, who pays the consideration? The mother or father pays the consideration, but to whom the service is given? Service is given to the student. So likewise, anybody can pay the consideration, not necessarily who receives the service. In fact, under GST law, whoever pays money is called as the recipient. That is a different discussion altogether. What I'm trying to bring out is, it is not sufficient if there is a money coming from any other person and we do not consider that while our billing or raising a tax invoice and corresponding discharge of tax, then we would be violating the valuation provisions. I'll tell you why I'm speaking about this. I'm also taking up one example. Take a franchisee module business where, there is this end of season sale. Let's say we have this brand Shopper Stop or brand, whatever, we have Soch, any of those brands. And in fact, if we go for a franchisee module, let's say, UCN, those, what they do is, after that end of the season sale, they say that 75% is the discount. Let's say the retailer shop who is under that franchisee module of business, his cost is, let's say, 60%. Okay. Now, since the company asked him to offer a 75% discount, does it mean that he sold it below cost? Do you mean to say that his cost was 60? Let's say, if it is a 1,000 rupee shirt, his cost was 600, and the company is asking him to sell at 250 rupees, giving a 75% discount. Do you think that 350 rupees of difference loss is borne by that retailer? Never. Why will he do that? He would have sold that on an assurance from the company saying that the company will give him the differential. Let's say if he's asked to sell for 250, the company might say that I will pay you 400. So the value for the transaction is 650 and not 250. But most times it is seen that tax is collected or discharged only on that 250 rupees, and this value reimbursement which is given by the distributor or the original manufacturer is left out. Especially this would be hidden in the books of accounts either in the form of discounts, incentives, rebates. Such names it would be sitting in my books of accounts. In fact, in actuality, it would be a consideration for a particular supply being given by my manufacturer. Let's look at the next myth for consideration, reverse charge tax discharge. Most of the times, there has been a great confusion as well. A lot of things came out, and recently also many new transactions got added to this reverse charge taxation scheme, where the recipient, that is the person who receives the goods or services, would be required to discharge the tax. Now, most of the times what they do is in the return, they just discharge the tax, claim the credit and be done with it. But remember, if at all you are claiming any credit under GST, then there should be a credit claim document. There should be a justification and corresponding substantiation with an adequate documentation. And as far as this reverse charge transaction is concerned, there could be 3 possible documents which are required. One, we call it as a reverse charge tax invoice, another one a self-tax invoice, another one a GST payment voucher. We will discuss this with an example of an illustration. We all know that the GTA services, whether we book it as a carriage inwards or freight for that matter, or transportation charges, and when we are receiving these GTA services, barring few exceptions, it is subject to the reverse charge mechanism. There could be a possibility that I am dealing with a transporter who is registered, or I am dealing with a transporter who is unregistered. If I am dealing with a registered person, say VRL Logistics, so the transporter himself will issue something called as the reverse charge tax invoice. In fact, when we do the GSTR 2A reconciliation, we see that many of the invoices have been uploaded by the transporters with a reverse charge ticked as yes. So there should be a corresponding document for this reverse charge invoices to enable us to claim the credit. Also, from the recipient perspective, there is something called as GST payment voucher, which we need to raise and maintain in the record purposes. I think we can, in our series of webinars, we can take up one topic about various voucher types required to be created under Tally for the GST perspective. So there we can discuss about this in more detail. So let us take another example of GTA services received from an unregistered person. I've just mentioned as Bharat Transport. In such a case, I am only discharging the taxes. There is no documentation. So I have to create a documentation called self-tax invoice. For each transaction of transport, I need to create a self-tax invoice. However, payment voucher or the GST payment voucher, this should not be confused to the accounting payment voucher. This is GST payment voucher to be issued only in case of reverse charge supplies, and that would be for each payment or each payment made to the supplier of reverse charge services. So let us go to the 7th myth. Aggregate turnover is turnover of specific GST number only. So whenever we have branches and multiple GST for the same PAN, it is very important that we determine the turnover PAN India, consolidating all the turnovers of my multiple GSTs, because that's what the GST law requires. Now the relevance of this turnover would be from the context of 5 fields. One is with respect to 5 aspects: registration determination, HSN determination, opting of the quarterly returns, annual returns and audit, and also with respect to due date and related relaxations. Let's take some of the examples. Let's say I have a HO with a turnover of 1 crore. I have a branch in Maharashtra, and the turnover of Maharashtra branch is 10 lakh rupees. So the limit prescribed for goods is, it is 40 lakhs. They've enhanced if it is pure trading, or if it is services, it is still the 20 lakhs. And of course, in certain states, it is not yet changed. That being the case, since my turnover in Maharashtra is just 10 lakhs, but HO turnover is around 1 crore rupees, do I need to still register in Maharashtra? The answer is yes, because whenever I'm considering the turnover, I need to sum up both the turnovers of both HO as well as my branches and then determine. So every transaction elsewhere will require me to register therein. Again, for HSN, if we understand, based on the previous year turnover, if my HSN, if my turnover is up to 1.5 crores, I need not comply with HSN. But if my turnover is above 1.5 crore and up to 5 crores, then 2 digits is required, and above 5 crores it is 4 digit. Of course, importers and exporters follow 8 digit HSN code. And if somebody has to opt for a quarterly GST AWAR 1 returns, and again 1.5 crores, they have this quarterly option. But as I took that example, let's say Maharashtra branch has only 10 lakhs and it has gone for the registration. Can it opt for quarterly? The answer is no, because okay, if we are taking this example as, let's say 10 crores in Karnataka and let's say 50 lakhs in Maharashtra, clubbing together, it has exceeded 1.5 crores. So in both the places, we have to opt for a monthly returns. Again, annual audit and annual returns and audit purposes, clubbing the turnover for both the cases, it comes to 10 crore 50 lakhs, and hence even for 18-19, although they have given exemption from audit up to 5 crores, so annual return is compulsory up to 5. I mean, we have 3 slabs up to 2 crores. Annual return is optional. Above 2 crores to 5 crores, annual return is compulsory, audit is not required. Above 5 crores, both annual return and audit is required. So that being the case, we might miss out thinking that, okay, Maharashtra branch has only 50 lakhs, so I might not require audit of that branch. So, but that is a wrong notion, because for clubbing the turnover for all these purposes, we have to club the pan-India multi-GST of same PAN all over. If we look at the COVID relief measures which the government has given, in fact, March month return, it has said that if the turnover is above 5 crores, 15 days relaxation for interest is provided, which ended 2 days before. That is 5th of May. It was the date for paying my taxes and filing my 3B without interest. From 6th May onwards, already 9% interest has started ticking. So now taking the same example, we have 10 crores at Karnataka and 50 lakhs at Maharashtra. Can I say that since Maharashtra turnover is below 50 lakhs, that 9% doesn't apply to me? The answer is again wrong, because for turnover, we have to club both of it. And once I club both, 5 crore is crossed, and I should have filed my 3B by 5th of May. Otherwise, till 24th June, if I file within from 6th May to 24th June, if I file, then I need to pay a 9% of reduced interest. But if I miss that deadline as well, then there is an 18% interest implication along with late fee right from my due date, which is 21st of May. 21st of April for March month return. So the whole point which I'm trying to make is understanding what needs to be determined for turnover is very critical from all these compliance perspective. Now, let us take another example where whether we can equate outward supply to inward supply, because anyways, inward supply reduction, anyways, it will lead to revenue neutral. Let me take an example, and so that you can connect to it very easily. Let us first understand that the treatment of outward supply is different. What happens if a transaction is treated as outward supply? It will increase my output tax. The treatment for reduction in inward supply is different. Either it will reduce my ITC or I need to reverse my ITC. Both cannot be equated, and appropriate treatment is necessary. I'll take an illustration, most common illustrations. Whenever a business purchases, let's say, inverter and new batteries, it is a very common practice to give away the old batteries. Let's say the value of new battery purchased is, the original value is 10 lakh rupees. I had old batteries, so I gave it off for 1 lakh rupees. So the supplier billed me, let's say 9 lakh rupees net, and he charged whatever 18% or whatever interest, whatever rate of tax that is applicable, he charged on that. Is it right to treat it this way? Can we net off and account the fixed assets as only 9 lakh? In fact, we have to give two treatments to this transaction. There is one inward supply, that is accounting of fixed assets or purchase of fixed asset, and we need to value at 10 lakh rupees and not the net off amount. On the other hand, there is a sale of old batteries. that is an outward supply transaction. So whenever I sell an asset also, that is also an outward supply transaction. So I need to raise a tax invoice for that and discharge the taxes. At the same time, purchase and account the fixed asset at full value. I do understand. Practically, you won't pay him 10 lakh and he doesn't return you back 1 lakh. It would be a book adjustment or a book entry. But at the time of raising of invoices, you can't compromise on this because both are separate. Outward supply is different and inward supply is different. Let us look at the last two myths which we are planning to discuss today. Capturing of a transaction. Many a times we see that whenever some reimbursements are received with respect to certain expenses, then it is ideally generally accounted as credit to my salaries. Let's say if salaries are being reimbursed, I credit my salary account. But is it fine to do so and keep quiet? In fact, there are only few transactions which qualifies as pure agent, and that is why that will not have tax implication. Let me take an example. You will avail the audit services from your auditor, or let's say if you're a company, you will ask the MCA filings to be done, annual return filing and all of that stuff. There are these MCA charges, which are forms related charges, which are taken by the reimbursed, which you will reimburse to your consultant. So that will be treated as a pure agent transaction because you are taking exact amount and the challan is raised in the client's name, and there is a track of, there is nothing being used by that consultant for his benefit. It is only of ease of facilitation which he is doing. Likewise, we have this rule 33 which talks about pure agent transactions. Only fulfilling those conditions can be subject to and termed as reimbursement. All other kind of reimbursement which will not fit into that conditions prescribed therein, it will not qualify as reimbursements, and GST does get triggered out of it, irrespective of the fact how you account it. It doesn't matter if whether you credited your expense account, whether you credited your income account, doesn't matter. But if there is such a kind of an transaction, then it will definitely lead to this. We commonly see this in FMCG sector where the distributor or the main manufacturer asks his distributors or super stockists to employ certain people, and the amount would be reimbursed. Ideally, that super stockist is supposed to raise a service invoice and even collect taxes because it doesn't fit into the definition or the conditions given in pure agent. So likewise, capturing the transaction also would be very critical. Now, finally, one more myth we would be discussing for the day: input tax credit reversal on credit notes received can be reduced from availment and so on net basis. I'll explain you with an example. What is important is whatever credit we take, that should be reported separately. Whatever credit we reverse, that should be reported separately, because availment is a different procedure, reversal is a different procedure under GST. It requires reporting accordingly. So I'm sure, this would be very critical. We have seen in most of our audit cases where, wherever the client is complying by himself, in GSTR 3B, what they do is, I've taken an example. Let's say this month the credits is 10 lakhs and there is a purchase return owing to which there is a 50,000 of reversal which is required. The ideal reporting is report it under gross like this way, because I'll tell you what can happen tomorrow if this goes like this without gross treatment, then it can turn out to be a double-edged sword. Department might say that, okay, 50,000 you have not availed, so you've missed the time, you missed the bus, you can't avail. 50,000 credit note is getting reflected in your GSTR 2A, but you have not reversed in the return. So I've just put a screenshot of how you can understand. Here, this is the net-based reporting where generally people are doing under availment itself. They put it as net of figures, which is wrong. The right treatment would be 10 lakhs here and reversal should be segregated separately. This is very critical. Sometimes we think that return filing is a mundane process and it's a routine thing, somebody can do it, but a small error kind of this or a misnomer because of which they would have reported that way can lead to 1 lakh implication in this instant case what we are discussing. So it's very critical to understand these aspects. Now that we have known that what are the myths and misnomers, let us try and understand what are the curatives which we can have in this respect. As far as consideration is considered, kindly introspect your transactions and see what are the modes of consideration you are receiving: monetary, exchange, or barter, or somebody else is giving the money in some other form. Whatever it is, we need to review the supply possibilities under various considerations being received. As we discussed already, classification, it is very much suggested to do an independent determination of all the products or supplies or goods, whichever you are doing. And as far as this supplies cross charge services are concerned, a flow chart could be prepared as to which head office or which branch is providing service to which branch and what are these things. I think a pictorial representation will give a clear thought process as to where all this cross charge could be hidden there. And as far as this input tax credits is concerned, we learned that 6 fields are very critical. So maybe our team needs to be trained, and these 6 things has to be made as a process, internal control process, where these things are ticked and checked whether this voucher is proper and valid enough to enable us to claim the credits. Taking the valuation again, especially with respect to these schemes, we have to be very critical. Whatever is sitting in the books of accounts in the name of discounts, the rebates and schemes and incentives, there could be some sort of supply hidden in that. So we need to figure out on case-to-case basis, on the terms of the contract, what is exactly the transaction. We need to evaluate all this and see whether it is right to reduce it as an inward supply or does it require treatment as an outward supply. Again, turnover determination, let us be clear that, so arrive the pan-India values, and that will be same for all distinct persons for that matter. The transaction treatments we discussed, the purchase of inverter and sale of old batteries. So we need to record both these transactions separately, bifurcate and segregate, and do not merge it off and do the net basis accounting. Transaction capturing also, whenever such reimbursements are there, we need to guide and train our team as to how things has to happen, because if we identify at the early stage itself, we can collect the taxes and the other party also can get the credit. That's how we can optimize on the credits part. Finally, coming to the reporting part, again here, if already in 17-18 and 18-19, if things are already done that way, anyways, for annual return due date is also over. If 17-18 or 18-19, if annual returns have not been filed yet, we can use annual returns as a means to rectify this error, gross up the figures and say that, and in 3B this was reported like this, but in actuality it is grossed up and then actually reversed. Probably that is one possible curative measure, but that could be again subject to litigation, but we can take a chance at least. And henceforth going, it is appropriate and proper on our team to guide them and say that gross basis reporting and reversal to be made, so that we don't miss out the huge amounts of credits which are there. As closing remarks, I would like to say that precautions and preventives are always better than cure. Wherever required, please do not hesitate to go in for a professional assistance, be it like quarterly reviews or opinions on taxations, including classification, because one consultation can go a long way in bringing savings and profitability to you. So it is always, taking professional advice might help you. And automation is the key. It's very, very important for preventing errors at the grassroots level. In fact, we were having a word with AntraWeb where there are so many places like this ITC reversal, where we can automate through technology, even in case of export transactions. For customs purpose, for GST purpose, we adopt the customs valuation. For accounts purpose, we need to follow the AS11, the forex transactions, and we need to use the RBI reference rate. So whenever there is this multiple, compliance requirements, I think technology is the only approach through which we can solve a lot of issues, and human errors can be definitely avoided using the technology. And having appropriate knowledge, continuous learning process and, training the team is very, very important. It's not enough. Training is never a one-time exercise. It's an ongoing thing. In fact, investing on personal development and training the team will reap a lot of, high value benefits. As we have seen, it can actually lead to financial savings and profit maximization. So with this points, I wish all of you happy learning and happy compliance, and we are open to take the questions now. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Annapurna. That was very enlightening for all of us. I myself was not aware that all the freebies are taxable. So I
Yeah.
think it is an eye opener. Yeah, many questions have popped up during the session.
Okay.
I will try and take up one after another. Uh, so there is one question by Mr. Rohit Mistry. How does one value such promotional gift like pens? So you were talking about freebies, and so how do you value them?
See, one is you can say that you are selling at the same cost what you bought for. Probably a check about whether the classification followed by the supplier would make sense, and if that is fine, then you can adopt the same valuation, same rate, same HSN classification if it is appropriate, and treat it as a regular supply and give it. Now, probably now the question arises: I can't identify client name and put it in the tax invoice as to. You can probably book it as a practical solution. I'm giving you B2C transaction, or if you're giving to your employees, book it onto the in their names itself and treat it as a B2C transaction. Discharge tax, claim the credit, don't lose the credit, claim the credit, discharge output tax, be done with it.
Fine. So how this will change if we give, like, if suppose we are a manufacturer and we give 2 free on buying of 3. So how do we take that valuation?
See, ideally, wherever this discounts come in, there could be two possibilities: quantity discounts and value discounts. Post GST, many have gone for this value discount module, where the net impact would be same. To give you an example, let's say if somebody buys 10, you want to give 2 free. Okay? Let's say the cost of each item is 100 rupees. So it is 1,200, correct? So 12 items you are giving 1,200. So instead of saying it as if you buy 10 you will get 2 free, you say that we will for 1,200 less discount of 200 rupees, on the balance 1,000 you charge tax. So net impact will be same, because section 15, which talks about valuation, allows me whatever discount I show on the face of invoice, I need not club it for the tax purpose. So net effect would be same, but the way we report in invoice will go a long way and save us during assessments. So you can still give freebies, but structure it properly so that tomorrow you will not face the tax implications.
That's very fine. There is one more question from Mr. Sandesh Kadam. Who is responsible if supplier has charged wrong GST? Like if he is charged 12% instead of 18%.
Correct. That's what the example I gave. As far as your inward supply transaction, when your purchase transaction is concerned, that is his headache. You will discharge tax as per the invoice you have received and pay and claim that corresponding credit. But if the same goods you are supplying further, you will have to collect 18% from, if let's say instead of 18 he has charged 12, but from your perspective you have to actually collect 18% itself discharge, because it's a collection mechanism and discharging.
Okay, so there are supplier related issue. One more issue where the supplier is showing only 2-digit HSN code as per, I don't know what is TO, and the recipient has under 4-digit HSN.
Okay, so turnover probably he's put
turnover.
So yeah, again see, as I said, you can't depend on your supplier as to what is the HSN code, and Google search is also not a safe mode of checking on it, because the Customs Tariff Act is what needs to be referred for determining what is your classification, and it all goes for a complete understanding of the product, understanding of the business, what is the utility of the product. See, same, for example, if we take a screw for that matter, there could be a general purpose screw or a specific purpose screw. The same item will fall under different HSN depending on for what purpose it is being used. So it is generalizing is very, very difficult, and independently every supplier should evaluate the classification and identify the rates appropriately.
So it is case to case.
Yeah.
There is one question from Neha Desai. In case of IST registration of GST at Mumbai and operating plant at Silvassa, which is a union territory, How do you treat the transaction? How do you treat that transaction?
I mean, what is the transaction? They
It
have
is
an
from
ID registration.
Mumbai,
Huh.
maybe sales or sales from Silvassa, because Silvassa is where mostly the factories are, and the delivery is made, suppose, in Mumbai.
Okay, let me probably I'll explain the conceptual difference between ISD and cross charge, and probably Ms. Neha might get the answer to whatever she has asked. So whenever it comes to input service distribution, let's say the service is provided. We'll take a classic example of audit fee, statutory audit fee. See, we do not do statutory audit under income tax for branch wise. We do it at pan India level, consolidated, business level we do. That being the case, invoice will be generally raised in the HO level. So what is ideal is one has to get an input service distribution registration there, raise the audit fee in the ISD, because that audit fee is for audit of all branches. That being the case, the ISD has to distribute that over there. But if we take the example where the branch itself supplies services through its own employees or through its own resources, then in such a case, we cannot go by ISD. We should go by cross charge, where we need to raise a tax invoice itself. Both cannot be interchanged. The treatments has to be appropriately given.
Okay.
I can see some questions. Shall I take them up?
Yeah, please.
So, whether new written template is applicable from April 20? No, the government has deferred the new written from 1st October 2020 as of now. Might be the possibility of deferring it further because of this scenario where it's quite a complex written comparatively, because it calls for a matching process. So that is the answer to that question. If turnover is below 5 crore, then for March 20 GSTR payment, interest will be applicable or not. Okay. If it is below 5 crore, then up to June 24, there are staggered due dates depending on whether your turnover is up to 1.5 crore or from 1.5 crore to 5 crores. That in such a case, within that last week of June, whichever state you are, whatever turnover it is, you need to arrive at that date. Within that you pay, there is no interest if it is below 5 crore up to that relaxed timeline. And somebody's typed some.
Yeah, there are many questions actually. If we purchase 100 quantity of material and customer accepted only 80 quantity, how can we manage this? How do we file return, or how do we actually manage that?
Okay, so this is like, will the customer be raising? Will he be sending it back through delivery challan, or who will be the responsible for taking it back? Like, let's say most of the cases, what happens? We need to issue a credit note. The supplier needs to issue a credit note for the balance 20% and raise an e-way bill and get the goods back accordingly. So tax invoice will go for 100. Credit notes issued less 20, and tax would be paid on the differential, because it can be treated as return of goods.
Right. There is one question related to exports. Under is made a year back. It is appears ICE gate but not reflecting GST portal. What is the procedure for same for refund?
Okay. So the issue with exports, it appears that it is with payment of IGST, and whenever it is with payment of IGST, we call it as rebate mode. So whenever we are taking GST rebate owing to the with payment option, there is a validation which happens. The validation is like we need to report that in GSTR1. We need to pay that taxes, like, either using credits or whatever, or if there is a cash element also. In 3B, in the appropriate column, we call it as 3.1B. There we need to report it, and table 6 of GSTR1, we need to report it. There is a validation between 1 and 3B which happens, and then it gets transmitted to the ICE gate. So once it gets transmitted, this data gets transmitted to ICE gate. Once the shipping bill is filed by our CHA, comparison which happens, and then refund is given. Since it is the due date is missed, you cannot, there is no direct procedure under the GST law now to, claim the refund through this. If the amount is huge, probably you have to go through the writ petition route.
Yeah. there is one question which is raised by Mr. Ashish Chandra Dwivedi. Goods are at transport in 31/3/2020 invoice date. Even if also on the same date, last day of the year, stock should receive after lockdown. How do I show in P&L?
Stock?
Stock will be received after lockdown.
Yeah. So not a problem. See, because this we call as in-transit goods. There is a condition under GST law that to claim input tax credits, we should be in receipt of goods. The supplier will show it as his outward supply in the month in which he dispatches. But for the purpose of recipient accounting it, he will account only as and when he receives it. So he can account that March invoice because he has not yet received the goods, say in the month of June or July, whenever he receives the goods. Absolutely no issue. And up to September, he can claim the credit as well.
There is a question which is related to HSN code, mentioning of HSN code in tax invoice. Is it mandatory without which recipient won't be able to claim ITC?
No, HSN code is not a mandatory field, but it is the obligation of the supplier issuing the tax invoice to mention it if his whatever I discussed up to 1.5 crores it is 2 digits and 1.5 to 5 crores 4 digits and 1.5 to 5 crores 2 digits and above 5 crores 4 digits.
Okay. So the one question from Mangala, if my selling product GST exempt, can I get GST refund what I paid to client?
Come again, sir?
I think if it is like, if my selling product GST exempt, if the product is GST exempt, can I get GST refund what I paid to client?
No, I mean, in fact, whenever your product is exempt, on your purchases and inward supplies, you get you will have paid the taxes. But if, let's say, if that product is, you are also into exports, to that exports extent, you can claim, irrespective of the fact that the goods are exempted, still you can claim it. But if you are not an export, but only a domestic sales you have, then there is no option to claim the refund. You are contributing to nation building.
Do we need to raise invoice for salaries being paid in HO and charged into the various branch?
See, it depends on whether the HO people are providing any specific service. There could be general employees who provide services to as an entity as a whole. So ideally, based on there should be some the activity determination process as to what is the service given. I mean, I'm sure practically it will be very difficult, but at least there should be some reasonable way of identifying. And also there is a place where there is a rule in the valuation rules. It is mentioned that if the other person is capable of claiming the credit, then the valuation wouldn't be questioned per se. So that is there as a shelter, but to the extent possible, we should adopt some systematic or scientific means of arriving at the value for this services provided by HO to various branches.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you all for being here.